Mm, it says I'm live, but I can't see myself. There I am. Okay, cool. Yay. Perfect. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. I'll just give a couple minutes for Facebook to catch up and let me know that I have some folks watching. And if you are tuning in, let me know. Say hi in the comments. Give me a wave. Give me a thumbs up. I love to know who I'm chatting with today. So, yeah, I'll be sporting some things you haven't probably seen before, like this little guy's kind of out in full force. So, as much as it's probably tempting to make comments about that, maybe let's just keep the comments to talking about SUP technique for this morning's talk. So cool, I got a couple viewers. Welcome to SIC Maui Talk Stories. And yeah, I did a post a couple weeks ago. I said, what do y'all want to hear about? We're setting up the next group of stories, and there were several responses, and one of them that was the most common was definitely different SUP techniques. So I put together a couple of talk story topics for y'all about technique, and this one today is going to be about steering your board. So that's really helpful to become a more skilled paddler. The better you are at maneuvering your board, and maneuvering your board is a really important skill for SUP technique, the more comfortable you can be in different conditions. And one of the best things about being really skilled at steering your board is it's not only going to help you in different conditions, like when you have side wind, being able to paddle on both sides, but it's going to help with drafting. It's going to help with chop. It's going to help with a lot of things. So normally when we talk about SUP technique, we talk about going in a straight line. And I talk a lot about how do I get my board to go in a straight line? How do I not zigzag? How do I not change from side to side every other stroke? And steering your board in a lot of ways is exactly the opposite. Taking the techniques that you're working on to steer your board to go in a straight line and using them instead of to your disadvantage. So what happens is when you don't know how to go in a straight line, you inadvertently end up steering yourself without even realizing it. So now when you realize what you need to do to paddle in a straight line, and then because you also understand that the opposite means you know how to steer yourself, you become a better all-around paddler, again, in different conditions and in different aspects of paddling. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so just to touch on, I have talked about several of the things I'm going to talk about today in other videos. So if you want more information, I'll mention this again at the end. However, if you want tips on how do I go in a straight line, not necessarily how am I steering my board, you're going to look up SIC Maui Talk Stories. I did this last year. Look up rotation. I did a whole live on rotation, and it's a great one, and I talk a lot about how do I use my body to help me go in a straight line. I'm going to talk today about how do I use my body to not go in a straight line. Okay, so you can look up the rotation video. Another really helpful one, if this is a skill that you're working on, a video that I did last year on SIC Maui Talk Stories, it was on paddling in side wind, because a lot of the techniques I'm going to talk about today about steering your board also are applicable to side wind paddling, because you're trying to steer your board to counteract the wind pushing you. So yeah, there's some more, there's always more information for you out there. So let's get started talking today. And again, if you're here, say hi in the comments, please. Let me know. Maybe say where you're tuning in from, or if you have any specific questions, if this is something you're working on, just anything. I love to interact with your comments and your questions on these live videos. So yeah, I'm gonna get it. And if you're playing along today, you might want to grab your paddle so that you can play along. You don't need your board, but I'm going to demo with your board. So demo with my board. So, again, you've heard me talk a lot about paddling in, oops, a little bit of dirt there, paddling in a straight line, and a lot of that having to do with your paddle or your blade, so your shaft or your blade, both of those things together being your paddle, angle. So I might say paddle angle, I might say blade angle, I might say shaft angle, but really those are all interconnected. It does have the most to do with your blade angle, but since your blade is usually under the water, you're not necessarily looking or being able to see the angle of your blade, but you can see the angle of your shaft, which is going to help you determine the angle of your blade. So when you're paddling in a straight line, see if I can get it so that I can, hey, there's the comments. Hi, Marianne. Hey, Wendy. Hi, Kate. Hey, let me scroll down further. I want to see the rest of the comments. Aloha, Taro. Okay, cool. Yay. Y'all are here and y'all can hear me. So, when you're paddling in a straight line, you want to have a vertical paddle shaft. So pretty simple to think about that. When I'm trying to paddle in a straight line, I want my paddle to be straight up and down. I talk a lot about this in the rotation video, that I'm actually going to use my body to rotate to make that paddle vertical. The reason for that is because I'm actually using the angle of my blade to steer my board. There's two main ways that I steer my board. And one's not necessarily more important or more useful than the other. I use both of them in a combination constantly. When I'm paddling, I'm applying both of these techniques. So the first one I'm going to talk to you about is the angle of your blade, determining the angle of your stroke, and therefore the angle that your board is going to be directioning towards or away from. So if I have my blade angled away from my board and I take a stroke, see there's this nice diagonal here in my paddle versus having this nice vertical. And this is what people do a lot when they first start paddling. Their paddle's at this angle and they're like, I'm going to one side all the time and I have to change sides and correct all the time. It's actually because you're steering yourself and you don't even know it. So when you do know that, you can use that to your advantage. If the wind is coming from my right side, I'm going to put a little bit of an angle on my shaft or on my blade, and I'm going to paddle with a little bit of an angle, and that's going to push my board away. My blade's angled away. It's going to push my board away from my paddle, right? That's pretty common sense. We kind of do that without even realizing it. But if you haven't realized that that's why I do go side to side all the time, that's going to help you realize, well, I need to correct that to go in a straight line, right? So the part that we don't often realize is that the opposite is also true. So if my blade angle, and this part's harder to do, but I'm gonna try and show you how on land here. If my blade angle is towards my board, and I'm exaggerating this angle a little bit here so that you can really see it. If my blade angle is towards my board, then that's going to actually pull my board towards my paddling side. So I would kind of over rotate, and maybe even, and we don't often talk about leaning being a good thing, but I'm talking about when you're steering your board, how leaning can help you. If I over rotate and I get my top hand out over my bottom hand, and this is hard to do again because I'm on land here, my paddle can't actually be going down into the water, I can actually get my blade angle towards my board, and I can actually take a stroke that's pulling me towards my paddle. So angling away from your board is going to steer you away from your paddle. Angling towards your board is going to steer you towards your paddle. Straight up and down, you're going to paddle in a nice straight line. So that is easier said than done when we're paddling, and it does take, as with everything, practice to be really first conscious of what's my blade angle. Usually it's here or here. And then using that to my advantage, practicing using that to my advantage, and especially practicing, and again, if you're curious more about this tip about paddling on my paddling side, again, if my wind is coming from my right side and I angle my blade, I don't want to be stuck. I don't want to be stuck paddling on one side the whole time against the wind. I want to be able to change sides. And so I want to be able to apply this angling towards my board. And so I combine that a little bit with, instead of my paddle entering right next to the side of my board like it typically would, I'm going to have my paddle enter the water maybe a little bit away from the edge of my board, so that I can also, because it's a lot harder to angle my blade, I'm going to actually angle my stroke, and it's as if I'm pulling the nose of my board towards my paddle. And the more I exaggerate that and pull myself to, because I'm always, when I'm paddling, I'm always planting my blade and pulling myself towards it, right? So if I plant my paddle blade straight in front of me and pull myself towards it, I'm going to go in a straight line. If I plant my paddle blade out at an angle and pull myself towards it, I'm going to be angling myself towards my paddle. So that's how you can actually use your paddle blade and the angle of your paddle and the angle of your stroke to pull yourself towards your paddle, towards your paddling side, which most of us in initial stages of paddling have a difficult time doing, right? Whenever we paddle, we're always going away from that paddling side, and then we have to change sides and correct and go away from the pin. So we want to be able to go in a straight line. We want to be able to pull ourselves towards our paddle and steer towards my paddling side. And I also want to be able to angle and steer myself away from my paddling side. I'm going to check the comments. Let me know if that's all making sense and that's all clear so far. Hey, Sam. Hi, Rob. Yay. A lot of my ladies that I love so much. Thanks for being here. So, cool. Then, we got cars from Lake Tahoe. Cool. So then, let's talk about the other technique for steering your board. And that's actually going to be with your body weight. So, another thing that when we're not conscious of it, we're often doing when we're paddling, especially in the beginning because we haven't learned these things yet, is I'm leaning on one side, often my paddling side. I'm leaning on that side, and you can't see this right now because I'm not in the water, but if I put the majority of my weight on one side, or even just more weight on one side than the other, the board is going to tilt a little bit in the water, right? And my board's going to be going tip, 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 tip to that paddling side. And so, if you ever video yourself paddling, you may or may not see that if this is something that you do, right? So, if I don't know that I'm doing it and I'm not conscious of it, I'm often using it to my disadvantage, because here's how leaning and putting more weight on one side than the other steers your board. When I have more weight on one rail, the board actually steers in the opposite direction. So when I lean on my right rail, the board steers, doesn't turn. This is subtle. This is subtle, but it makes a difference. My board steers to the left. The more aggressively I lean on that side, a little bit more, it's going to steer a little bit more. But even just a little bit of leaning on one side does steer your board in the opposite direction. So if I'm leaning on my left rail and my left rail is dipping down into the water more than my right rail, that's going to steer my board to the right. So it's opposite. Lean right to go left, lean left to go right. So what happens when we don't realize that we're doing that is I'm on my paddling side, and I'm often not conscious as a new paddler of putting more weight on that paddling side when I take a stroke, and therefore I'm putting weight on my opposite rail, and I'm steering myself away from my paddle, and then I'm having to correct instead of going in a straight line, right? So I can use that to my advantage. Again, if the wind is coming from, I'm just going to keep using the same example. The wind today is coming from this direction. I'm just in a part of my yard where you can't really feel the wind. It's a very hot December day in Florida, but I am not complaining because it just finished raining for 3 days. So, right. So if the wind is coming from my right side, I can consciously put more effort onto my left rail, put more weight onto my left rail. This, again, just like everything, takes practice, takes stability, and that's going to help steer my board in the direction of upwind, or in the opposite direction that I'm leaning, right? So I'm going to steer my board by leaning on the left. I'm going to steer my board to the right. So I can combine that with the steering of my paddle stroke, right? But I don't want to, again, just be stuck on one side, leaning on one side, paddling on one side. I want to be able to paddle on both sides as equally as possible. So I'm going to combine that with these reach out and away strokes. And you notice I'm in this like super awkward position. This is not a great technical body position, and I'm also trying to exaggerate it so you can really see it, but leaning way out on my left rail because the wind's coming from the right, and I'm trying to steer myself away from or into the wind, and I'm going to combine that with these reaching out and away and pulling myself towards my board. And when you're really exaggerating it, it really does kind of look that awkward. However, when you practice this and when you become efficient at combining these two things, leaning on the opposite rail that you want to steer your board towards and angling your paddle blade or your stroke angle in the direction that you want to steer your board, you can become really good at paddling in wind from any direction and still going in a straight-ish line and still being able to paddle on both sides equally-ish, depending on how windy it is. So that's great when it's windy and choppy. It's also great, again, when you're drafting and you're trying to stay in that little draft pocket of the board in front of you, and you don't want to be going off the wake this way and off the wake that way. And so this can be big movements, and this can be, again, this is something that I'm actually doing constantly when I'm paddling. It's like micro maneuvering my board to stay in a straight line. So I'm compensating by, maybe I'm leaning a little bit on this rail or a little bit on that rail, or I'm changing the angle of my blade a little bit this way, a little bit that way, so that I'm not always trying to steer and make these big corrections, so that I'm trying to keep myself in a straight line or in that draft pocket, right? And again, I'm going to check the comments. Let me know if this is all making sense, if there's something you want me to repeat, if you have questions. Cool. Eduardo, hello from Spain. Hola. Cool. All right, awesome. So there's a couple more, a little more advanced, a couple more things advanced that I want to touch on, and then once again I'll check the comments for any questions, and then I'll give you some more resources again at the end of the video for more Sure, more research and practice and learning and education. So, right, another advanced tip. If I'm and when I'm combining leaning on my rail to steer the opposite direction with this blade angle stroke, paddling, trying to pull my board towards my paddle, what I'm actually going to try and do, and I can't really show you this on land, but I'm going to tell you it. I'm going to try and lift my board rail so much, I guess I can show you a little bit on land, that I'm going to try to paddle with my blade going underneath my board. That's going to help me be able to get this angle without having to reach way out here to make it happen, or way out here to make it happen. So this is helpful too. The paddle blade going under your board, so it would actually be like if I was actually in the water. My board wouldn't be this tilted. My board would still be more or less flat in the water, but my blade would actually travel a little bit under the board. That's going to steer me towards my paddle. And I do, on the RS, I put my heel. I turn my heel out, and I weight into my heel so that I don't have to put my hip way out here. I use, because I'm moving my feet around all the time. That's helping me steer my board. It's helping me trim my board, something I've talked to you guys about before, also in the upwind paddling talk story. I put a heel on the rail. If you're in a dugout, you're not going to be able to put a heel on the rail. However, if you're in a dugout, any bit of leaning is more potent, more effective the lower you are down towards the water. So that's one of the reasons why dugouts, you don't have to move around as much, because all of the movement that you do the lower down to the water is more pronounced. So don't think like, I gotta have my heel like this because they just said that. No, you don't have to even have your heel here. It's just something that I do. You might have seen me doing. That's me trying to steer my board. So yeah, that's what I want to say about steering the board. Those two main techniques, just to recap: blade angle away towards, stroke angle away towards, and body weight, opposite, leaning right to go left and left to go right. So opposite rail in the water, steers. So practice, practice, practice. And for more videos where I'm actually on the water talking about these things, again, look up Talk Stories Paddling Sidewind, Talk Stories with Seychelles Paddling Upwind, and Talk Stories with Seychelles on rotation. And I touch on each of those things a little bit more again, and it always helps to hear it. So we got this question from, I don't know if it's Dino or Dino. When would you choose to steer by leaning the board or steer to use the draw stroke? Okay, great question. I would always be doing both, because I want to be steering as the least amount that I have to be steering. I want to be able to maintain my stroke integrity as much as possible, which means equal body weight in my feet, not leaning to one side, which means paddle vertical, not at an angle. So the least amount I have to deviate away from my vertical paddle shaft and equal body weight on both my feet, the better. So I'm always doing a little bit of steering with leaning and a little bit of steering with my paddle when I have to, rather than exaggerating one more than the other. That being said, if it's really choppy and I'm not stable enough to put enough weight on one rail to steer me, because if I do that, I feel like a choppy wave might come and tip my board over, and I don't want to have more weight on one rail and risk that tipping, then I would be steering more with my paddle than with my feet. So hope that answers that question. Marianne's recommending the rotation video, and Kate, yeah, let me know how practicing this weekend goes. Cool. And then any more questions you have, I'm just going to talk for another minute or two, so pop those in there. I have a women's retreat was scheduled for January, and I've actually shifted that to the end of September 2022. And the new date is filling up fast. So if you want info on that, reach out, or it's also on my website and my Instagram, Seychelles SUP, and SeychellesSUP.com, and just Seychelles SUP on Instagram. And that's for women only. And men, I have been listening, and I will be doing a co-ed retreat camp, maybe the end of 2022 or early in 2023, just depending on how things go with this little guy here. So what else? The next talk story in a couple of weeks is going to be on the Woman of Water Sports page, I'm pretty sure. I'm not looking at my schedule right now, but I believe that one is on the pelvic floor and hip stability, and using your pelvic floor as a woman and how that can help you be a stronger, more effective paddler. So that's an exciting topic on the Woman of Water Sports page. So if you're a lady and you're not on that yet, definitely join that. And yeah, if I don't see any more questions, I am going to, okay, one more from Taro here. Moving around on the board is difficult. And stuck like a mouse on my board, yeah. So my best advice for being able to move around on your board is practice, practice, practice. You know, I don't know. Oh, you said you live in Lake Tahoe, so this time of year I know it's cold in the water, but can be nice out of the water. But I would practice when you're not scared of falling in, and just fall in and just move. Just move on your board, and it doesn't matter if you fall. So, you know, come to Florida or practice this summer when you don't mind falling in, because that was how I learned to be able to really move up and down on my board. Was I just went for it and fell in a lot and had so much fun with it. And then once I learned how to move my feet up and down on my board, then I tried to do it without falling. And I'm trying to think which talk story I talk about moving your feet. But I believe I've done a talk story on moving your feet where I actually do talk about the, it might even be called Moving Your Feet, where I've talked about also the step-by-steps that I use for moving around on my board. So, yeah, takes time, takes practice, and you're not alone, because there's so many people that even have been paddling for years, and we start to practice pivot turns, and they're like, feet are super glued to their board. Like, that's it's really common, and it's a lot about just like relaxing and practicing and relaxing and practicing. So having fun with it. Okay, thank you for being here. Thanks, mahalo to SIC Maui for having us here, and for the amazing equipment. And as always, send me your questions. Reach out. I love hearing from you. Have a wonderful day. Aloha.